Yuval Noah Harari, in *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*, explores how we Homo sapiens became so successful and others did not. Harari believes it was our unique cognitive abilities that made the difference. About 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens underwent a cognitive revolution, and he writes, which gave them the edge over their rivals to spread from East Africa and across the planet. We know how to organize ourselves as nations, companies, and religions, giving us the power to accomplish complex tasks. And to conclude, he proffers, we made God up. Yanni, would you agree?
Well, to go back to the previous conversation we were having, just because there's something there, because we feel there's this innate thing that we have to look for something beyond ourselves, doesn't mean that it's true. We also have this innate thing called xenophobia, and that's not necessarily true. It's about what we do with it.
We come sort of custom built from the factory with that attribute?
Well, yes, we do, and we have to overcome that.
Xenophobia is created by economic systems. Xenophobia stems from teachings of otherness that come from a structure of white supremacy.
Yeah,
we have xenophobia.
Do you have a view on this? I heard you say no.
No, I said no.
Did you say no? Yes. Okay, let me bring it back to Sia.
All right, I'm going to just answer one of your questions about whether we can have agency in the absence of a God, which ties into what you said about how maybe this thing, this longing for transcendence, is built in us, and what's important now, you keep saying, is what we do with it. If it's built in by evolution, it's built in by something that doesn't have agency. You cannot have an end result that has agency if the initial input had no agency in it. Does that make sense? So the answer is no.
Again, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners at home, our viewers at home might agree, we're going to have to go back and watch this tape quite closely, and I think a lot more wisdom will kind of unfold, having kind of listened to it a little more carefully. But let's get some closing comments from our panel. And remember, the question was, do we need God? I think Dr. Motshekga is itching to go first, and then we'll go Thabiso, Sister Neo, and Farid.
The human being is a physical manifestation of the 5 principles that constitute the Godhead. So if we don't need God, then we don't need ourselves. We can't be unless
but there's
the Godhead
so many people in this world who go about their lives moral, conscious, they have a heart for the world, and they do it without God belief, Dr. Esa.
Because what is in them is the Godhead, which is the animating force. Without that animating force, we would not be.
But you're answering for people who, and I've heard some people who believe in that way, that you can be moral without God, you know, basically disagree with what you've just said, Dr. Motshekga. Dr. Isak?
Well, I think, first of all, it is quite possible for people to have values, to have morality, without seeing that morality as emanating from or located in the dreams or the commands of a transcendent being. The second thing is, I think, all the crimes of religions which all declare faith in God, to put all of that at the faith of the transcendent, that is a huge leap in logic. Finally, I want to say this, that every single generation, since the beginning of recorded history that we know, all of them have identified with an entity that forms a part of their lives, in the words of the Quran, closer to your jugular vein, an entity that is a part of their beings, a part of their existences, a part of their histories, and a part of their futures, inside them and beyond them at the same time. And if that has been the unmitigated history of the whole of humankind, something has to be said.
Just because a lot of people believe in something doesn't necessarily mean that people are in agreement.
Every single generation.
I've got to give a word, Dr. Isak, to Sister Neo and Dlanzi.
I think we need to get rid of the religious God, especially the white man who dictates everything for everyone. I think for me, a God that doesn't evolve and is relevant to the current circumstances is not a God at all, because God is spirit, and spirit is forever evolving and changing, and it cannot be contained.
Thabiso?
Yes, I think we need a God insofar as this God helps us experience living on earth a much more better experience in our otherness, in our blackness, in our queerness, in our difference. We need God insofar as God helps us imagine the impossible. And to sit here and have this conversation is also a moment of self-indulgence, because there are people who are worried about what godliness is while we are still struggling with our humanity. And I think that when we go back into African philosophy and we sit and meditate on what Ubuntu is, then the idea of what God is going to naturally come without having to define it.
That which speaks in you, that which sees hears, smells, is the spirit inside you, which is the manifestation of the highest being.
I want to go back and to end with in the same way that we began with our panel. And Yanni, perhaps to ask this of you, in a context where religion is still growing in the world, people clearly still see a need for God to give them hope or to
in fact,
answer
overall,
what happens.
it is declining, though, in all places in the world. There are more people disassociating with religion.
Do you know why?
I'm not going to say I know if I don't know, so I don't know.
What are some of the reasons you think that people, especially people that you talk to, people from your
okay.
community who
So-
are choosing to consciously
Yes.
uncouple from God?
Yes, well, I think it's this whole question of religion not being relevant in the 21st century. With the current holy books that we have now, how are we going to answer questions about CRISPR, the new gene editing technology? How are we going to answer questions about artificial intelligence? The holy books are not being rewritten now. They can't be updated now. Like, science is continuously revising these things, improving these things. And that's why I would like to I'd put my bets on science, because that's something that can evolve with us.
I'll give the final word to you then, Sia. In terms of, again, going back to the original question about the need for God, do you agree that no matter what the age is, whatever context we find, or do you suggest that no matter what the age or context we find ourselves in, there will always be a place for God?
I think so, and I think the failure on a lot of religious people's part is we have not extrapolated from our holy books up until today. We should have done that, and one of the reasons religion has declined, or the practice of religion has declined, is we've become a very consumeristic society, and this began at around the Enlightenment, when humanism, man became the center of the cosmos. And we're going to end up in a place where the appetites of the very rich and the very powerful, coupled with very powerful technology, will become God.
Powerful point upon which to end, and to really end the program tonight. I'll end as I began, with Richard Dawkins, who believes God is an imaginary friend for adults. But what do we do with the many disagreements about who this entity is and whether it exists at all, and what our neediness is with regard to it, him, her? What we do know is, judging by how old religion is, and depending on who you ask, it's growing numbers around the world, it seems to suggest that we need the comfort and hope that someone external is in control. I'm Madam Speaker. Thank you for watching.